Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are discussing about the urinary system. Urinary system, also known as the renal system or urinary tract. How does the urinary system work? Urinary system's function is to filter blood and create urine as a waste byproduct. The body takes nutrients from food and converts them to energy. How is the urinary system controlled? The brain is the master control of the entire urinary system. And what is the regulated by the urinary system? The urinary system maintains an appropriate fluid volume by regulating the amount of water that is excreted in the urine. Other aspects of its function include regulating the concentrations of various electrolytes in the body fluids and maintaining normal pH of the blood. Urinary system is regulated by the endocrine system by hormones such as antidiuretic hormones, aldosterone and parathyroid hormone. Purpose of the urinary system is to eliminate waste from the body, regulate blood volume and blood pressure, control levels of electrolytes and metabolites, and regulate blood pH. How does urinary system regulate pH? Kidneys have two main ways to maintain acid-base balance. Their cells reabsorb bicarbonates from the urine back to the blood and they secrete hydrogen ions into the urine. By adjusting the amounts reabsorbed, secreted, they balance the blood stream's pH. Renal system or urinary tract consists of the kidneys, ureter, bladder and urethra. Urinary tract is the body's drainage system for the eventual removal of urine. The kidneys have an extensive blood supply via the renal arteries, which leave the kidneys via the renal vein. Each kidney consists of functional units called the nephrons. Filtration of the blood and further processing waste in the form of urine exit the urine via the ureter tubes made of smooth muscle fibers that propel urine towards the urinary bladder, where it is stored and subsequently expelled from the body by urination. The female and male urinary system are very similar, differing only in the length of the urethra. Urine is formed in the kidneys through a filtration of blood. The urine is then passed through the ureters to the bladder, where it is stored. During urination, the urine is passed from the bladder through the urethra to the outside of the body. 800 to 2000 milliliters of urine are normally produced every day in a healthy human. This amount varies according to fluid intake and kidney function. Now the function. Main functions of the urinary system and its components are to regulate blood volume and composition such as sodium, potassium and calcium. Regulate blood pressure, regulate pH homeostasis of blood, contributes to the production of red blood cells by the kidney, helps synthesize calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D, stores waste products, mainly urea and uric acid before it, and other products are removed from the body. Urine production. Average urine production in adults human is about 1 to 2 liters or 800 to 2000 ml per day, depending on state of hydration, activity level, environmental factors, weight and individual's health. Producing too much or too little urine requires medical attention. Polyuria is a condition of excessive urine production, which is more than 2.5 liters per day. Oliguria, when less than 400 ml is produced. Anuria, one of less 100 ml per day. How does hydration affect your kidneys? Hydration, especially chronic dehydration, results in the production of urine, which has a higher concentration of minerals and waste products. This can lead to the formation of crystals, which can affect kidney function and contribute to certain kidney diseases, such as kidney stones. What are the 4 steps of urine formation? There are 4 basic processes in the formation of urine, starting with plasma, filtration, reabsorption, regulated reabsorption, in which hormones control the rate of transport of sodium and water depending on systemic conditions, takes place in the distal tubule and collecting duct. Next is the secretion and excretion. The first step in urine formation is the filtration of blood in the kidneys. In a healthy human, the kidney receives between 12 and 30% of cardiac output, but it averages about 20% or about 1.25 liter per minute. The basic structural and functional unit of the kidney is the nephron. Its chief function is to regulate the concentration of water and soluble substances like sodium by filtering the blood, reabsorbing what is needed and excreting the rest as urine. In the first part of the nephron, bovine capsule filters blood from the circulatory system into the tubules. Hydrostatic and osmotic pressure gradients facilitate filtration across a semi-permeable membrane. The filtrate includes water, small molecules, and ions that easily pass through the filtration membrane. However, larger molecules such as proteins and blood cells are prevented from passing through the filtration membrane. The amount of filtrate produced every minute is called the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR, and amounts to 180 liters per day. About 99% of this filtrate is reabsorbed and it passes through the nephron, and remaining 1% becomes urine. How do kidneys control urine concentration? The kidneys are able to separate the reabsorption of water and solutes in the loop of Henle, distal nephron, and collecting ducts. This means urine can be made more concentrated or more dilute than plasma, depending on how hydrated you are. Control in concentration and volume. Urinary system is under influence of the circulatory system, nervous system, and endocrine system. Aldosterone plays a central role in the regulating blood pressure through its effect on the kidney. It acts on the distal tubules and collecting ducts of the nephron and increasing reabsorption of sodium from the glomerular filtrate. Reabsorption of sodium results in retention of water, which increases blood pressure and blood volume. Antidiuretic hormone is a neurohypophyseal hormone found in most mammals. Its 2 primary functions are to retain water in the body and vasoconstriction. Vasopressin regulates the body's retention of water by increasing water reabsorption in the collecting ducts of the kidney nephron. Vasopressin increases water permeability of the kidney's collecting duct and distal convoluted tubule by inducing translocation of aquaporin CD water channel in the kidney nephron collecting duct plasma membrane. Urination, also sometimes referred to as micturition, is the ejection of urine from the urinary bladder through the urethra to the outside of the body. In healthy humans and many other animals, the process of urination is under voluntary control. Infants, some elderly individuals, and those with neurological injury, urination may occur as an involuntary reflex. Physiologically, micturition involves coordination between the central, autonomic, and somatic nervous system. Brain centers that regulate urination include the pontine micturition center, periaqueductal gray, and the cerebral cortex. In placental mammals, the male ejects urine through the penis and the female through the vulva. How often should you urinate? It's considered normal to have to urine about 6 to 8 times in a 24-hour period. If you are going more often than that, it could simply mean that you may be drinking too much fluid or consuming too much caffeine, which is a diuretic and flushes liquid out of the body. Kidneys are bean-shaped reddish-brown paired organs, concave on one long side and convex on the opposite. They are normally located high in the abdominal cavity and against its back wall, laying on either side of the vertebral column between the levels of 12th thoracic and 3rd lumbar vertebra. The outside the peritoneum, the membrane that lines the abdomen, the structural unit of the kidney that actually produce urine are the nephron, of which there are approximately 10 million in each kidney. What is the best time to drink for your kidneys? Water. Water is simply the best drink you can have. Water is a 0-calorie, perfectly hydrating, cheap drink if you are in the earlier stages of the kidney disease. Choosing water most of the time to quench your thirst will keep your body and kidneys functioning well. The structural unit of the kidneys are the nephron. Each nephron is a long tubule or extremely fine tube that is closed, expanded, and folded into a double-walled cup-like structure at one end. This structure, called the renal corpuscular capsule or Bowman capsule, encloses a cluster of capillaries, microscopic blood vessels called the glomerulus. The capsule and glomerulus together constitute a renal corpuscle, also called a Malpighian body. Blood flows into and away from the glomerulus through small arteries or arterioles that enter and exit the glomerulus through the open end of the capsule. This opening is called the vascular pole of the corpuscle. Urea, together with water and other waste substances, forms the urine as it passes through the nephrons and down the renal tubules of kidney. The tubules of nephrons are 30 to 55 meters or 1.2 to 2.2 inches long. The corpuscles and the initial portion of each tubule, called the proximal convoluted tubule, lie in the renal cortex. The tubule descends into a renal pyramid, makes a U-shaped turn, and returns to the cortex at a point near its point of entry into the medulla. This section of the tubule, consisting of the two parallel lengths and the bend between them, is called the loop of Henle or nephronic loop. After its re-entrance into the cortex, the tubule returns to the vascular pole, the opening in the cup-like structure of the capsule of its own nephron. The final portion of the tubule, the distal convoluted tubule, leads from the vascular pole of the corpuscle to a collecting tubule. By way of a short junctional tubule, several of the collecting tubules join together to form a somewhat wider tubule, which carries the urine to a renal papilla and renal pelvis. Although all nephrons in the kidney have the same general disposition, there are regional differences, particularly in the length of the loops of Henle, glomeruli that lie deep in the renal cortex near the medulla, which is juxtamedullary glomeruli, possesses long loops of Henle that pass deeply into the medulla, whereas more superficial cortical glomeruli have much shorter loops. Among different animal species, the length of the loop varies considerably and affects the ability of the species to concentrate urine above the osmotic concentration of plasma. Now the nerve supply. The kidneys are supplied with sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves of autonomic nervous system, and the renal nerves contain both afferent and efferent fibers. Afferent fibers carry nerve impulses to the central nervous system and efferent fibers from it. Internal network of blood vessels. The internal network of blood vessels forms part of the blood processing apparatus of the kidney. Arteries and arterioles, interior and posterior division of each renal artery divide into lobar arteries, each of which enters the kidney substance through or near a renal papilla. Each lobar artery gives off 2 or 3 branches called interlobar arteries, which run outward between adjacent renal pyramids. When these reach the boundary between the cortex and the medulla, they split almost at right angles into branches called arcuate arteries that curve along between the cortex and medulla parallel to the surface of the kidney. Many arteries called interlobular arteries branch off from the arcuate arteries and radiate out through the cortex to end in networks of capillaries in the region just inside the capsule. Root they give off short branches called the efferent arterioles, which carry blood to the glomeruli, where they divide into 4 to 8 loops of capillaries in each glomerulus. Near and before the point where the efferent arterioles enters the glomerulus, its lining layer becomes enlarged and contains secretory granules. This composite structure is called the juxtamedullary apparatus and is believed to be involved in the secretion of renin. The role of hormones in renal function, they are then reconstituted near the point of entry of the efferent arteriole to become the efferent arteriole carrying blood away from the glomeruli. The efferent arterioles are almost twice as thick as the efferent arterioles because they have thicker muscular cords, but the sizes of their channels are almost the same. Throughout most of the cortex, the efferent arterioles redivide into a second set of capillaries, which supply blood to the proximal and distal renal tubules. The efferent glomerular arterioles of juxtamedullary glomeruli divide into the vessels that supply the contiguous tubule and vessels that enter the bases of the renal pyramid, known as vasa recta. These vessels run toward the apexes of the pyramids in close contact with the loop of Henle. Like the tubules, they make hairpin bends, retrace their path, and empty into arcuate veins that parallel the arcuate arteries. Normally, the blood circulating in the cortex is more abundant than that in the medulla. But in certain conditions, such as those associated with severe trauma or blood loss, cortical vessels may become constricted while the juxtamedullary circulation is preserved. Because the cortical glomeruli and tubules are deprived of blood, the flow of urine is diminished and in extreme cases may cease. Now the veins and venules. Venules that lie just beneath the renal capsule, called stellate venules, because of their radial arrangement, drain into the interlobular venules. In turn, these combine to form the tributaries of the arcuate, interlobar, and lobar veins. Blood from the renal pyramids passes into the vessels called venae recti, which join the arcuate veins. In the renal sinus, the lobar veins unite to form veins corresponding to the main divisions of the renal arteries, and they normally fuse to constitute a single renal vein in or near the renal hilus. Lymphatic network. Lymphatic capillaries form a network just inside the renal capsule and another deeper network between and around the renal blood vessels. Few lymphatic capillaries appear in the actual renal substance, and those present are evidently associated with the connective tissue framework, while the glomeruli contain no lymphatics, and lymphatic networks inside the capsule and around the renal blood vessels drain into lymphatic channels accompanying the interlobular and arcuate blood vessels. The main lymph channels run alongside the main renal arteries and veins to end in lymph nodes beside the aorta and near the sites of origin of the renal arteries. Ureters. Two ureters, these narrow tubes carry urine from the kidneys to the bladder. Muscles in the ureter walls continuously tighten and relax, forcing urine downward, away from the kidneys. If urine backs up or is allowed to stand still, a kidney infection can develop. About every 10 to 15 seconds, a small amount of urine are emptied into the bladder from the ureters. Bladders. This triangle-shaped hollow organ is located in the lower abdomen. It is held in place by ligaments that are attached to other organs and the pelvic bones. The bladder's wall relax and expand to store urine and contract and flatten to empty urine through the urethra. The typical healthy adult bladder can store up to 2 cups of urine for 2 to 5 hours. Upon examination, specific landmarks are used to describe the location of any irregularities in the bladder. These are the trigon, a triangle shaped region near the junction of the urethra and the bladder. Next is the right and left lateral walls on either side of the trigon. Next is the posterior wall or back wall, dome, roof of the bladder. 2 sphincter muscles. These circular muscles help keep urine from leaking by closing tightly like a rubber band around the opening of the bladder. Now the blood and nerve supplies. Blood supply of the bladder is derived from the superior, middle and inferior vesical arteries. The superior vesical arteries supply the part of the bladder which is dome of the bladder, and one of its branches in males give off the artery to the ductus deferens, a part of the passageway for sperm. The middle vesical artery supplies the base of the bladder. The inferior vesical artery supplies the inferolateral surfaces of the bladder and assists in supplying the base of the bladder, the lower end of the ureter, and the other adjacent structures. Nerves to the urinary bladder belongs to the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nerve fibers come from the hypogastric plexus of nerves that lie in front of the fifth lumbar vertebra. Sympathetic nerves carry to the central nervous system the sensations associated with distension of the bladder and are believed to be involved in relaxation of muscular layer of the vesical wall and with the contraction of sphincter mechanism that closes the opening into the urethra. The parasympathetic nerves travel to the bladder with pelvic splenic nerves from the second through fifth sacral spinal segment. Parasympathetic nerves are concerned with contraction of the muscular walls of bladder and with relaxation of its sphincter. Consequently, they are actively involved in urination. Male urethra is the channel that conveys the urine from the bladder to the exterior. In the male, it is about 20 centimeter long and carries not only the urine but also the semen and secretions of the prostate. Bulbourethral and urethral glands. During urination and ejaculation, it opens up and its diameter then varies from 0.5 to 0.8 centimeter along its length. But at other times, its wall touch and its lining is raised into longitudinal folds. The male urethra has 3 distinguishable parts: the prostatic, the membranous, and the spongy, each part being named from the structures through which it passes rather than from any inherent characteristics. The prostatic section of the male urethra commences at the internal urethral orifice and descends almost vertically through the prostate. From the base of the gland to the apex, describing a slight curve with its concavity forward. It is about 2.5 to 3 centimeter long and is spindle shaped. Its middle portion is the widest and most dilatable part of the urethra. The membranous part of the male urethra is in the area between the two layers of the membrane called the urinogenital diaphragm. The urethra is narrower in this area than at any other point except at its external opening, and is encircled by a muscle, the sphincter urethrae. The two small bulbourethral glands are on either side of it. The membranous urethra is not attached to the layers of the urogenital diaphragm. The spongy part of the male urethra is that part of the urethra that traverses the penis. It passes through the corpus spongiosum of the penis. The ducts of the bulbourethral glands enter the spongy urethra about 2.5 centimeters below the lower layer of the urogenital membrane, except near its outer end. Many mucous glands also open into it. Female urethra is much shorter, 3 to 4.5 centimeters, and more distensible than the corresponding channel in males, and carries only urine and the secretions of mucous glands. It begins at the internal opening of the urethra into the bladder and curves gently downward and forward through the urogenital diaphragm, where it is surrounded, as in the male, by the sphincter urethrae. It lies behind and below the symphysis pubis, except for its uppermost part. The urethra is embedded in the anterior wall of the vagina. The external urethral orifice is immediately in front of the vaginal opening, about 2.5 centimeters behind the clitoris, and between the labia minora, the inner folds at the outer opening of the vagina. Structure of the urethral wall. Urethra of the male is a tube of mucous membrane supported on a submucous layer and an incomplete muscular coat. The membrane forms longitudinal folds when the tube is empty. These folds are more prominent in the membranous and spongy parts. There are many glands in the mucous membrane, and they are more common in the posterior wall of the spongy part. The submucous layer is composed of fibroelastic connective tissue containing numerous small blood vessels, including more venules than arterioles. The thin muscular cord consists of smooth or involuntary and striated or voluntary muscle fibers. The smooth muscular layer, longitudinally disposed, is continuous above with the detrusor muscle of the bladder and extend distally as far as the membranous urethra. Okay viewers, this was all about the urinary system. If you like our presentation, please like, share and subscribe to our channel, and be sure to press the bell icon. Thank you for watching our video.